Nothing's more frustrating than having a logo that looks perfect in your head but terrible on the screen. So stick around because in today's video, I'm going to show you the 5 most common logo design mistakes and how you can fix them. Let's get started. Mistake number 1, and maybe the most offensive of all 5 of these common logo design mistakes, is using a raster image instead of a vector. So let me explain real quick. If you're using a program like Photoshop or Canva or ChatGPT to create your logos, this is a huge mistake that I'm seeing happen more and more. So let me explain why this is actually not the best way to go for a professional logo design or branding. So all of these programs, they might give you a JPEG file or a PNG, which are all made up of pixels, so those tiny little squares on your screen. And when you try to blow them up or scale them down and do this multiple times, there's going to be a noticeable loss in the quality of the image. On the other side of things, if you use a vector-based program like Adobe Illustrator, you can create a logo that is entirely made up out of points and shapes, which means that these can be scaled as often or as little as needed without compromising the quality one bit. So if you do have a JPEG file or a PNG file, yeah, you can scale it up, but it's going to fall apart and it's not going to hold up for most applications and uses. So if you do decide to go that way, chances are you'll still want to trace it in a program like Illustrator to make sure that it works for any other designers, vendors, or applications that you will be using your logo on. The second mistake is poor font choices. Now, I know some people might consider slapping a font on something a logo, but it's really not. The thing is, we have to be very intentional and deliberate about our font choices. For example, if you want to use a sans serif typeface, like what you'll see in a lot of modern films, action movies, and things like that, it evokes a very strong type of feeling. If you add a little bit of grunge to it, it changes things up a little bit. Once you start adding color and other elements to it, it can change the feel of the logo completely. So you want to be very deliberate and take your time researching the fonts to think about what kind of feeling it gives you. If you instead decide to use a regular serif typeface, these are typically a little bit more elegant, sophisticated, maybe something that you would use for a period piece or a beauty brand or something of that sort. So take your time in researching your fonts. Mistake number 3 is adding too much detail. Now, I understand the temptation here because if you're working in a program like Illustrator, it can be really tempting to just zoom in, focus on those details, and really kind of do a little bit too much. Probably more than you need to in most cases. If you look at some of the most successful logos out there, a lot of them are actually fairly simple and straightforward. And one of the key things to remember here is that you want to make sure that your logo reads well at large sizes, but also when they're scaled way down at a small size. So what I typically will do is anytime that I'm working on a logo, I'll zoom out and I'll do the squint test to make sure that I can still see it at these smaller sizes. So avoid the temptation to just go all out with the detail and instead figure out what you can take away that will still allow your logo to stand strong. If you're enjoying this video so far or finding any value in it at all, then please go ahead and hit that like button and be sure to subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot and it will help it reach a wider audience. Mistake number 4 is a very common mistake and one that I see happening all the time, and that is adding color too soon. Now, I know that it can be tempting once you start to flesh out a logo or find a nice pairing of fonts and icons or something like that together to jump in and start seeing what all the different color combinations can look like. But I really urge you to resist this temptation and instead focus only on the black and white version of the logo first, or the single color version of your logo. I always start with a single black or white logo first, because if I'm sharing these with a client or if I'm sending them out for review, I don't want anybody to get hung up on the color that early on in the creative process. Really, you just want to strip it down and be able to show somebody the cleanest, most simplified version of the logo until you get a little bit further along. Now, once the client has given you the thumbs up or the okay, that's when you can start introducing some color into the logos. So hold off on adding color, wait until you nail down that single color version, and then go from there. And mistake number 5. This one is pretty easy to miss, and you'd be surprised how many people actually don't pay attention to this one. I'm talking about things like kerning and line spacing. Now, if you were to select a font and just type out the word of your service or your business, it can be pretty easy to miss because most people aren't paying attention to that spatial relationship between the individual letters or lines in a logo. But let me tell you, the spacing between the individual letters and the lines matter. And the reason for this is because you don't want to look back at a logo that you've made 2 months or even 2 years down the road and see that there's a huge gap between two letters and then almost no space between a different set of letters or lines in your logo. So paying attention to these fine details like the kerning and the line spacing is one of the fastest ways to separate your work from looking amateurish to being more professional and sophisticated. And these are the details that you should be paying attention to anytime you're creating a logo. So I just want to emphasize that if you really and truly want to become a professional logo and brand designer, make sure that you're creating all of your logos and branding in a vector-based program like Adobe Illustrator. Always start off with the single color logo design first. Be intentional and deliberate about those font choices and resist the temptation to add too much detail or too much color too early on in the process. And lastly, make sure that you are paying attention to these spatial relationships between the individual letters and the line spacing in any of your logo designs. So I promise you, if you work to avoid these 5 biggest common logo design mistakes, it's going to elevate your work and take it from looking like a beginner logo design to a professional logo and brand designer who knows what they're doing and who is an expert in their craft. If you enjoyed this video, then leave me a comment and let me know what are your biggest logo design challenges or questions. Thanks so much for watching, keep designing, and we'll see you in the next one.